Got to pay back.
James Brown, the godfather of soul, his mark on funk, R&B, rhythm and blues, disco and rap, has impressed generations with his stage performances. Notable for his voice and frenetic dance moves, James has made a name for himself with titles like I Got You, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, Please Please Please, and Living in America. His innovative rhythm made him one of the most influential American musicians of the 50s, alongside others like Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan. He was the man who turned gospel into rhythm and blues and soul. His music also helped create other musical styles. Mick Jagger, Michael Jackson, and David Bowie, like so many others, acknowledge being inspired by him.
Wow! I feel good.
James Joseph Brown, born in a suburb of Barnwell, South Carolina, in 1933, overcame a childhood marked by misery and marginalization after being abandoned by his mother at the age of 4. His father took him to Augusta, Georgia, where he moved in with an aunt who ran a brothel. At the age of 12, he was expelled from school because he didn't wear the right clothes to attend classes. He started making a living working in all kinds of jobs. James sang and danced for soldiers at a military installation, worked at a cotton harvest, washed cars, and shined shoes. Once he said, "I started shining shoes at 3 cents, then went up to 5 cents, then 6 cents. I never did get up to a dime. I was 9 years old before I got a pair of underwear from a real store. All my clothes were made from sacks and things like that. But I knew I had to make it. I had the determination to go on, and my determination was to be somebody." As an escape from the harsh realities of being a black person growing up in the rural southeastern of the United States during the Great Depression, James turned to religion and music. He sang in church choirs, where he developed his captivating and powerful voice. As a teenager, he began performing in contests and talent shows, learning to play many instruments, but he couldn't stay out of trouble. At the age of 16, he was arrested for stealing a car and was eventually convicted, serving a 3-year sentence in a reformatory. While in prison, James organized and led a gospel choir. Bobby Bird and his family's gospel choir visited prison to entertain the young offenders. They met James, and after assuring the authorities that they would give the young delinquent a home, they took James under their care. After being released from prison in 1953, James turned his attention to sports and devoted the next 2 years primarily to boxing and semi-professional baseball. In 1955, Bobby Bird invited him to join his group, the Gospel Starlighters. With his great talent and charisma, he quickly stood out in the group. The group now was named the Famous Flames, and they relocated to Macon, Georgia, where they performed during the break of Little Richard's show. In 1956, the group recorded a demo tape of the song Please 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 and played it for Ralph Bass, a talent scout for King Records. The man was very impressed by the music, and especially by James' passionate singing. He offered the group a recording contract, and within a few months, Please 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 became their first hit. During the performances of this song, James would stop, kneel, and wait for a band member to put a cape around his shoulders. As he was being taken away, he took off his cape, ran to the microphone, and started begging, "Baby, please don't go. I love you so much." The audience went wild. He would soon receive many nicknames like Brother of Soul #1, Godfather of Soul, and most famously, Mr. Dynamite. In 1958, they released Try Me and other hits like Lost Someone, Night Train, and Prisoner of Love. Besides writing and recording music, James toured tirelessly. He performed 5 or 6 nights a week throughout the 50s and 60s, a schedule that earned him the title the hardest working man in show business. The artist was a phenomenal performer, incredible dancer, and touching singer. His shows were hypnotizing and exuberant, leaving the audience in ecstasy. James meticulously mastered and performed any popular dance at the time, and often improvised his own after announcing that he was about to do the James Brown. A shrewd and ruthless bandleader and manager, the singer scheduled his tours for large audiences and demanded perfection from his band members. He fined musicians that did not play well. During performances, he asked them to improvise on the spot. One of the singers once said, with considerable understatement, "You had to think fast to keep up." On the night of October 24, 1962, James Brown recorded a live album at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. Initially, the live album was rejected by his label because it did not feature new music. Live at the Apollo was considered a crucial event in James' career, and it was considered one of the 100 greatest rock moments of the 60s by Entertainment Weekly magazine. The record, released 3 months later, marked the beginning of James' transformation from R&B's smallest star to soul's biggest bandleader. Brown went on to record most of his most popular and enduring singles during the mid-60s, including I Got You, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, and It's a Man's World. For that, he won a Grammy for Best R&B Recording, and was considered the first song of a new genre, the funk, an offshoot of soul, and a precursor of hip-hop. It was in the 60s that the singer became more involved in social causes. Many African Americans began to recognize James as a culture hero, a talented, rich, and famous black man, a symbol of their race in a racist society. In 1966, he recorded Don't Be a Dropout, an eloquent appeal to the black community to put more focus on education. A supporter of nonviolent protest, James once told Black Panther activist H. Rap Brown, "I'm not going to tell anyone to pick up a gun." After the assassination of Martin Luther King, he appeared on television to advocate for peace and urged calm, telling viewers not to dishonor Martin's memory by resorting to violence. Many of his followers and members of activist groups questioned his position. In 1969, his song Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud became an anthem during the Civil Rights Movement. In the same year, James supported Richard Nixon for the US presidency, but behind that support, there were second intentions. According to reports, he did this because that year the US IRS claimed that the singer, who always insisted on being paid in cash and rarely paid taxes, owed them $6.5 million and mistakenly believed Nixon would help him. Consequently, the IRS took his jet, his radio stations, his fast food chain Go Platter, his cars, and tried to take over his house as well. Over the next few years, James Brown's songs continued to be successful, especially Sex Machine, Hot Pants, and The Payback, which continued to sell millions of copies. Although his career went down in the late 70s due to financial problems and the rise of disco music, James made an inspired comeback with a performance in the classic movie from 1980, The Blues Brothers. His song from 1985, Living in America, presented prominently on Rocky IV, was his biggest hit in years. However, after becoming one of the first musicians in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, James Brown slowly descended into depression and drug addiction. The height of his personal problems came in 1988. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for a police chase caused by him. He was armed and he was not himself, and had broken into a meeting of insurance agents that was taking place next to his office to demand that the person who used his private bathroom reveal himself. He was released on parole in 1991. At that time, he was also investigated on a series of accusations ranging from domestic violence to drug possession. Upon re-emergence from prison, James returned to touring, once again delivering high-energy shows, although on a much reduced schedule compared to before. He had another run-in with the law in 1998, after firing a rifle and putting the police in another car chase. After the incident, he was sentenced to a 90-day drug rehabilitation program. Finally, he dedicated himself to working with young rap and hip-hop musicians, who saw in him, despite his mistakes, a role model who managed to overcome misery and marginalization. It's no secret that James Brown had a dark side. James Brown biographical film Get On Up, released in 2014, left out many of the strange, uncomfortable, and downright violent incidents that James caused. In the same year, the singer's daughter Yama Brown published a memoir titled Code Sweet, My Father James Brown and Me, which details her life growing up with an often unstable father. In this work, Yama recalls the many moments when James beats her mother in front of her and her sister. Then she writes about how this violent legacy stayed with her into adulthood. The knocking always starts the same way, with the same terrible sounds. My parents are in their room, behind closed doors. First comes the boom of my father's voice, then I hear what sounds like a thunder rolling through the house. It's Mommy banging on the wall. I hope she screams, but she doesn't. She whines. She must have learned a long time ago that screaming incites him. Yama said she could feel the house shaking during her father's rages. As much as I loved my father, and I sure loved him, I hated him during those times. She also revealed that although he never hit her, the trauma of seeing him abuse her mother lasted her entire life. In fact, she married a man who was very similar to her father and was only able to break free after years of abuse. Yama's mother's name is Deidre Jenkins. She was James' second wife, but not the only one to be assaulted by him. In total, the singer was married 4 times. In 1984, he married a 3rd time to Adrienne Lewis Rodriguez and began smoking PCP, a hallucinogen that causes acute anxiety, paranoia, and violent hostility. In 1988, she called 911 to report domestic violence about 11 times. James was arrested 3 times and charged with assault and intent to kill, possession of PCP, resisting arrest, and gun illegal possession. Just before she died in 1996, Adrienne appeared to be intent on divorcing James, and authorities want to prosecute him for domestic violence. However, the woman died of heart failure during surgery. Notes left by a trusted police informant state that a doctor confessed to killing Adrienne to keep her quiet. The notes went unnoticed for over 20 years, during which time the informant died. James' 4th wife, Tommy Ray Haney, with whom he had a son named James Jr., was also a victim of his aggressive behavior. In 2004, he was arrested again on charges of domestic violence against her. Although he said in a statement, "I would never hurt my wife. I love her very much," he was charged with a $1,087 fine to avoid arrest. James also lost a child from his first marriage to Velma Warren. Teddy Brown, born in 1954, had his life shortened by a fatal car accident in 1973. The turbulent, damaging, and chaotic phase of this great artist definitely killed his artistic career. For James Brown fans, his legacy is about fun and music, but for his kids, it's a little less exciting. In addition to domestic violence allegations, the singer has received harassment allegations. The cases involving James are not even possible to detail. However, in short, in the 90s, he made inappropriate proposals to a singer and a former employee of his. The most serious case was revealed in 2005, when Jacqueline Hollander sued James, alleging that he abused her and used a gun to intimidate her in 1988. At the time they met, she was 13 years old and battling intestinal cancer. Years later, they became friends and recorded songs together. One day, James invited her for a drive. He took her into the woods and committed the act. Throughout his life, he had several relationships outside his marriage. As a result, he had kids, but how many they were is unknown. The artist's driver, William Morrow, told the Guardian newspaper that he was responsible for transporting many women to the singer's properties. William also claimed that James didn't perform as well in bed, adding that women who stayed with him teased him because of his manhood, saying things like "didn't get hard" and "it is the size of a pencil." Whatever his performance issues were, he worked well enough to have 9 recognized children, 3 from his first marriage, 2 from his second, and 1 from his fourth and final marriage. The other 3 are from other relationships. Once he died, more so-called sons came forward to demand a share of his inheritance. James Brown died on December 25, 2006, after being hospitalized for severe pneumonia. His death was a severe blow to the African American people who, despite what happened, continued to see him as a huge star. His official cause of death was a heart attack and fluid in the lungs, but the journals highlighted several reasons to question this report. In fact, there is a possibility that he was poisoned, but by whom? We do not know. There is a theory he did business with gangsters. An autopsy would help resolve some of those uncertainties. But James' daughter Yama did not allow it for reasons she did not want to reveal. Although he died on Christmas 2006, the dispute over his estate lasted until July 2021. His fortune, which ranges from $5 to $100 million, was disputed among his ex-wives, children, grandchildren, many mistresses, an ex-manager, 30 lawyers, and a long-time driver. According to someone close to James, he was aware that when he died, this dispute would be a mess. Along with his will, he left an audio recording stating that anyone who goes against his will be disinherited. In fact, James left very little to his family. In his will, he left most of his fortune to a charity to fund scholarships for children in need. He left valuable personal belongings for some of his children, $2 million for the education of his grandchildren, and nothing for his last wife. His latest marriage had complicated legal issues. The fourth wife had already been married and did not officially annul their previous marriage until 2 years after her marriage to James. In June 2020, the South Carolina Supreme Court ruled that Tommy Ray Heaney was not the singer's legal wife and would not have the rights to his estates. Until the day of his death at the age of 73, James Brown was still active, recording music and offering live performances. In a career full of recognitions where perhaps the most valuable one was being introduced to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Composers Hall of Fame. In short, it was an excellent career that was interrupted 16 years ago, but whose extensive legacy we will never forget.